Okay, so I want to make a few reflections on the state of the US election. Still a primary stage, of course, but the US election process is perhaps longer than any other democratic country. In fact, I was thinking about this last night. If we look at an entire presidential term cycle, there's only really 1 year in a given cycle, which is election free, so to speak. And obviously, there's campaigning in the background the whole time. What I mean by that is, take, for example, 2012 as an election year. So that year is the election. 2013 includes the inauguration. 2014, um, midterms. 2015, sort of election politics free. 2016, election year. So my point is, in an American election cycle, it's pretty much an ongoing process. And that's a good thing, I believe, for democracy. Um, Now, my next video, by the way, is going to be on the difference between US and UK politics. You'll probably tell from my accent that I'm British, those of you who aren't already my subscribers. And a quick disclaimer on that point. I know sometimes people get quite defensive and even feel offended when a foreigner speaks about the politics of their country. Well, a few things I want to say about that. Firstly, my intention is not to dictate to American people how to vote. That's their concern. And it's entirely their right, their sovereign right to vote for whoever they want. Um, so I'm not telling anyone to vote, how to vote. But I do think outsiders can have an opinion because America is the world's most powerful country. So of course it affects the rest of us, who is America's head of state. Um, if it was a small country, it wouldn't have the same sort of global impact. But the fact of the matter is, whoever leads America will have an influence on the rest of the world. So, from that point of view, I do think there is a legitimate interest for outsiders. Bearing in mind it isn't just domestic issues, it is international issues as well. Um, I mean, my country will probably always be close to America, whoever's president, but that's just that. I'll try not to make this video too long because I do have a habit of talking at length sometimes. A lot of people I've spoken to pretty much reflect my observations of this race that it's become very polarizing. And I think this election is both one of the most interesting, but also one of the most, for many people, worrying elections in recent American history, possibly in my lifetime. So this will be the eighth American presidential election in my lifetime. I was born in 1985, and I think it might be the most polarizing so far, and that's a big statement. There's certainly been some heated elections. Bush Gore 2000, Bush Kerry 2004, probably Obama Romney 2012. But all of those, I think, pale into insignificance compared to what we're going to see if Trump and Sanders are the nominees. Now, I'll just say from the outset, I am much more pro Democrat simply because I find my own views align much more with Democrat positions. But that's not universal. There's some areas I agree with the Republicans on, and some areas I disagree with the Democrats on. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of details about that. But a quick observation about the current situation. Obviously, Chris Christie, Carly Fiorina have dropped out. I believe it will only be a matter of time before Ben Carson drops out. Now, Ben Carson I found quite an interesting character because he always had a very soothing sort of voice. I really liked his Hands ad, actually. I think that's one of the strongest ads of this election cycle. I think it was very inspiring. But the man himself has some pretty hard right views. And yet he sounds like a shrink, basically. He sounds very soothing and very, comforting. So he'll certainly be a memorable candidate, but I think he will drop out soon, simply from his performance is getting quite lax. He's having to fire staff and so on, or drop staff is probably a more accurate description. Um, Jeb Bush is obviously controversial for no other reason than his name. And I think it's fair to say that Americans, regardless of his politics, don't want another Bush in the White House because understandably they are skeptical of dynastic politics, and it's one of the main reasons it goes against Hillary Clinton as well. There's been powerful families in American history: the Roosevelts, the Kennedys, Bushes, the Clintons, the Adams. Probably none more so than the Bushes in terms of the overall time they've been in the White House. Possibly the Roosevelts would beat that, but I think it's fair to say that that will be something that will really go against Jeb. And the thing about Jeb Bush is, by Republican standards, I would regard him as pretty moderate. I know there's a big thing in the Republican race about who's the most conservative, but to outside observers, um, pretty much it is it is possible to sort of break it down between hardliners and moderate conservatives, so to speak. I mean, it's this whole thing about being Ronald Reagan esque, but actually, Reagan himself, I imagine, would be unsettled by some of the things that is coming out of this race. I mean, Reagan, I'm reading the Reagan diaries at the moment. Now, he said something interesting for an entry, I think it was March 84. He said he met the Prime Minister of Portugal, Suarez. This is March 84. He is a socialist, but as rabid and anti communist as you can find. So Ronald Reagan was obviously open minded enough to tell the difference between a socialist and a communist, something that Fox News could probably learn from. Come to that in a second, but looking at the Republican side, obviously Trump is like a steam train, and it's astonishing to think that so many people are buying into his crap. I mean, I am very skeptical of Donald Trump. I think he's possibly the most dangerous candidate in America from either party since Barry Goldwater. I think the man comes out with bombastic generalizations and these brash statements that he will not give any weight to. And I understand he's saying that, you don't want to give secrets away before, it's to our advantage not to give the plan away. That's fair enough. But you also want to know that this guy is going to be prepared for the White House, because running a country is not the same as running a big CEO. I mean, a big corporation. I mean, Donald Trump treats America like it's a company, and it's not. It's 328 million lives. It's not a big corporation where you can just fire half the states. Um, and the sheer arrogance, I know it's compelling to some people, but I imagine to many other people it's very off putting. I mean, he's had to temper some of his speech, but he just can't help himself. He just comes out with every time I think, well, maybe, the media is misjudging him, or maybe he's making a fair point about something, he just says something to deflate that. I try to be open minded about Trump. I try to think, okay, well, maybe the media is being a bit hard on him. But then he comes out with some statement that you have to listen to it twice to think, did the guy really just say that? I mean, it's almost like he's in an action film. I really find it incredible so many people are endorsing this man. It'll be interesting to see what happens in South Carolina. It's my understanding the Bush family have very high support there. Whether W's intervention will help his brother or not, I don't know. Um, One thing about both Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz is that what's striking for me, and I only discovered this recently, but both men have extremely limited executive experience. Rubio has 5 years as a junior senator, Cruz 3 years. Now, I appreciate that Obama was also a junior senator, but when I look at American history, for example, on the Republican side, you have Reagan, Nixon, you have these guys who had a lot of executive experience as governors, for example, before getting into the White House. Um, Even if we look at other senators from either side, Lyndon Johnson, years as a senator, vice president. So I appreciate what Marco Rubio was saying, that it's not just the length of experience, it's what you do with the experience. But I just can't help thinking that they lack experience on the top level or on a high level. Um, it seems astonishing to me that someone could get into the most powerful job in the world having been in a middle range job for 3 years. That to me is astonishing. So Chris Christie may have had a point. I believe Marco Rubio would be prepared for the 2020 cycle because then he'll have more experience. As for Ted Cruz, I don't trust him. I think he's probably more sincere than Trump. but I am wary about some of his very hard right positions. Rubio, although I don't agree with his positions, I think he's a much more reasonable character. Certainly a lot more responsible. And I think Rubio is a good grasp of foreign policy from what I've seen in the debates. Um, my favourite of the Republican field, although I'm not a Republican, is John Kasich. And I think Kasich is interesting because on the surface, Kasich is arguably the most experienced there, apart from possibly Jeb Bush. I mean, if you look at Kasich's record, he's a solid conservative. He's a good record as governor. He ticks all the boxes for a conservative Republican governor. In any other election year, he would probably be leading the field. He's not really a national figure. He's not really a household name the way some of the others are, and that may be the only thing going against him. But that to me just demonstrates how this is a very unusual year. Um, and I hope Kasich does do well. And it's not that I agree with Kasich. I'm not a conservative. I'm a centrist. But I think Kasich would be a lot more responsible as president than Trump or Cruz, for that matter. So I hope Kasich does well. I hope Kasich gets a nomination, but I don't think it will happen. Um, as for the Democrat side, well, I've already spoken in another video about my concerns about the influence of hardcore feminism in the Clinton campaign. Leaving that aside, I think there is legitimate trust issues. Leaving that aside, leaving those two important aspects aside, I quite like Hillary Clinton. I think she is centrist. I think she's more centrist than Bernie Sanders. I don't think she's a, I don't think Hillary Clinton is far left at all. But, and she's certainly no isolationist when it comes to America. But I think that, again, it's her name, it's a trust factor, and there's a lot of things going against Hillary Clinton's campaign. And she's made the mistake of not distancing herself from some of that. And, for an intelligent woman, which she unquestionably is, some of her approaches has been come across as quite naive. I mean, to not distance herself from Madeleine Albright's comments was, in my view, politically very naive because all you're going to do is marginalise a lot of young women and a lot of men. Now, Sanders, um, certainly outside America, Sanders is going to get a lot of support because, by European standards, he's seen as very progressive. In America, he's getting a lot of support among young people. In that sense, he's very comparable to Britain's Jeremy Corbyn. Although it would be wrong to say that the twins of each other, for example, have different positions in Israel. It would be historic. Sanders would be the first Jewish president. He'd be the oldest president. Um, if for no other reason, you have to respect the man's energy for a man of his age. Politics aside, that's something that's, it's a character thing. Running a presidential campaign, winning primaries, you have to give the man some credit for doing that. Now, I agree with a lot of the things that Bernie Sanders says, but I do have some big concerns about Bernie Sanders. Number one, like a lot of socialists, he promises a lot of things that you do wonder, well, how is he going to deliver this? Secondly, if I was an American, I'd be somewhat concerned about, frankly, what his position will be on tackling radical Islam and his positions on crime. Um, I mean, he did say in the last Democratic debate we need to take on ISIS and so on. He has to say that. But I really do wonder, would a President Sanders be able to stand up to Putin? Would a President Sanders really be able to make America look strong? And I really do wonder about it because I think Sanders is fundamentally a decent man. He's proven that by trying to be civil in the campaign. He has proven that. But I do think there's legitimate concerns. He's not a communist. I think Fox News is ridiculous to call him a communist, but he is pretty far to the left. And there are certainly, as a centrist, I would have concerns about his stance on crime, about his stance on a lot of issues. I wouldn't rush to vote for Bernie Sanders. Um, I like him more as a person than Donald Trump, but that doesn't mean he would be a good president. Trump, I think, probably gets support because he looks like a tough guy. He's like, let's make America great again, and it's all about muscle flexing, and that wins votes. So what is very notable about this election is that the centrists, and this has happened in the UK as well, though in the UK it's less obvious, because the thing about European politics, at least British politics, is our conservatives look like American centrists. Um, by British standards, Kasich would be seen almost as left as a hard right winger, for example. Trump would be seen as far right. So there's a different dynamic there. But it's definitely a very unusual election cycle. Again, I have to reiterate, because I know I've said come out with a lot of opinions here. I have to reiterate, I'm not American. I'm not telling anyone how to vote. Just voicing my opinions here. And you know what? If Americans wanted to talk about the UK election, I wouldn't care. It's fine. Democracies have to be open. Um, so obviously there's still a long way to go. I believe the Republicans are going to have to be very careful, otherwise they will tear themselves apart. That's another reason that Kasich should, in my view, get the nomination, because he's been far more mature than most of the other candidates, with a few exceptions. So I am heartened to see that he done well in New Hampshire, simply because I honestly have some concerns about a Trump presidency. Um, and yeah, I have some concerns about a Sanders presidency as well. But like I say, this is an unusual election, and it will be interesting to see what happens. Um, Way too early to call. I'm not a political pollster. I'm not an expert on these things, of course, and I don't over analyze it. I don't know county by county, and I'm not that well versed in which demographic is likely to vote for who and so on. But I think this will be an election to remember. One thing is clear: 1 year from now, we're either going to see a President Trump, a President Cruz, a President Sanders, or a President Clinton. It's going to be one of those four people. I would be very, very surprised if it's President Case or a President Rubio. And it's not that I don't think Rubio is a serious contender. I think he's tough. I just think that lack of experience is going to go against him. Could go against Cruz as well, but I think Cruz has probably been more effective at tapping into core Republican voters than Rubio has. Um, have I left anyone out? Well, like I say, Christie and Fiorina are out of the race. Um, there is actually a few other people. Rocky de la Fuente on the Democrat side. Believe it or not, he's another candidate, but he's really a perennial candidate. He wasn't in the debates. I doubt most people watching this video have even heard of him. I only found out about him because it was on the Wikipedia page. Um, so there's a lot of interesting reflections to make. Um, yeah, I mean, usually in an American election cycle, I'd be very favourable towards one candidate or another. With this one, I really don't know. I am more pro-Democrat, and I think Sanders is more likable as a person overall than Trump. But I do have concerns about Sanders as well, because I really do wonder, will he take on the threat from Islamism? Will he be ultra politically correct? Because there are legitimate issues that the right raise, that conservatives raise about things that are going on in America. So anyway, it'll be interesting to see what happens. Still a long way to go. Um, it could well be that this Trump thing is a long phase, and it could be that core Republicans after South Carolina. I think South Carolina is going to be interesting. I think it will. I think if Clinton wins South Carolina and Trump doesn't, then it's going to get back into a kind of normal race. But if Trump and Sanders win South Carolina, this election is definitely going to be fireworks in November. That's for sure.